warning strike. Federal government postponed planned meeting with ASUU. Minister declares NNPC has no fund. Dr. Ganiyat Popola, who was a registrar in the Department of Ophthalmology at the National Eye Center in Kaduna, was abducted nearly 8 months ago along with her husband and nephew. While her husband was released in March, Dr. Popola and her nephew have remained in captivity. Weeks ago, members of NAD had protested in all tertiary hospitals across the nation to demand the immediate release of Dr. Popola. The proposed meeting between the federal government and members of the Academic Staff Union of Universities ASUU, earlier scheduled to be held today. President of ASUU, Emmanuel Oshodeke, confirmed that the meeting will no longer be held as announced by the Minister of Education on Friday, although on Wednesday, August 28. Public university lecturers under the auspices of ASUU had last week threatened to embark on a nationwide strike over what they described as the unwillingness of the federal government to honor the 2009 renegotiated agreement. The notice is part of the resolutions reached at the National Executive Council meeting of the Union held at the University of Ibadan a weekend before. ASUU's demands include welfare matters, funding for universities, and the need to stop the proliferation of universities across the country. The planned meeting was to prevent The federal government has declared that the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited (NNPCL) does not have the funds required to rebuild old pipelines. Minister of State for Petroleum Resources Oil, Heineken Lokobiri, stated this at the just concluded Energy and Labour Summit 2024, organized by the Petroleum and the Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, Pengasan, in Abuja. While speaking about the divestment of international oil companies and the need to ramp up production, Lokobiri emphasized that Nigeria also needs to repair its pipelines, which he said are old, corroded and expired. He also noted that even if the country can produce more than 1.7 million barrels of crude oil, the problem remains how to evacuate it to the terminals. Consequently, he called for public-private partnerships to fix the old pipelines. The proscribed Islamic Movement of Nigeria (IMN), also known as Shiite, have denied claims that they murdered 2 police officers during a clash with security agencies. You will recall that 2 police officers were killed on Sunday following a bloody clash between operatives of the FCT Police Command and members of the IMN. The command, while reacting to the incident, accused the Shiite sect of an unprovoked attack on its men at Wuse Junction. However, the IMN have denied the allegations by the police. Leader of IMN Group, Abdullahi Musa, who led the procession on Sunday in Abuja, explained that the police command opened fire on its unarmed members during the procession, which he described as religious observed by Shiites across the world. He insisted that police officers in plain clothes killed their colleagues so they could put the blame on the Shiites. Meanwhile, President Bola Tinubu has vowed to keep promoting the rule of law, adhere to the principles of separation of powers, and tolerate dissenting views within the ambit of the laws of Nigeria. President Tinubu said his administration has made steady progress in the effort to rebuild the country through legal and judicial reforms. The president spoke yesterday in Lagos when he declared open the annual General Conference of the Nigerian Bar Association (NBA). In her keynote address at the conference, the Director General of the World Trade Organization (WTO), Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, said efforts must be made to accelerate national growth and development, stressing that Nigeria has all it takes to succeed. You're currently listening to the World News at 12 right here on Voice of the People 90.3 FM. We'll now head into the news analysis segment of News at 12 this afternoon, and for that I have Mr. Chukwuma Okoro. He is a journalist with many years of experience as well as a political, social and national affairs analyst. Welcome to the World News at 12. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for having me.
I would like to begin with the very last story, where the president has vowed to protect the rule of law and to tolerate dissenting voices. Now, this was at the opening of the annual general conference of the Nigerian Bar Association. So this has to do with the judiciary, right? But then when you talk about tolerating dissenting voices, throughout last week and even up till yesterday, there's been a trend of arrest of investigative journalists. In fact, there was one who has a page on Twitter that always talks about, always leaks certain documents, talk about things that many people don't know about. Now, this person was arrested since August 5, and nobody knew about it until another investigative journalist, David Hundeyin, raised the alarm on X, which was formerly called Twitter. This was someone who has been arrested since August 5. Now, with the president vowing to protect the rule of law and tolerate dissenting voices, with this trend of the arrest and what we could call intimidation,
the police is clearly after him. For what? And the same charges that were slammed against Ajero, also the charges against this young man, Pidum. You know, and we have people who have clearly killed Nigerians. We have people who have sponsored insecurity. And a particular government says, the people that are behind insecurity are also in my government. And we don't hear anything beyond that.
I want to talk about the fact where the president said that he will tolerate these dissenting views within the ambit of the laws of the country. And of course, one can say that is understandable. But then there are certain laws which have a certain ambiguity about them. For example, when you arrest somebody for the crime of maybe cyber stalking or cyber related offenses, who defines these offenses to make sure that what has been done is that a crime has been committed? Right now, the Adeyanju is under fire for saying that defamation is not a crime. Who defines what is and is not a crime? Who defines who when we say things like cyber-related crimes, right? What exactly qualifies as a cyber-related crime? Or are these just ambiguous words in order to hold people down when they say something that the government does not like?
The problem with our liberal democracy is that we tend to take it out of definition. You know what liberal democracy means? Liberal democracy is that the government performs its responsibilities and duties to the extent that it does not infringe on the rights of citizens. The difference between liberal democracy and authoritarianism is the fact that the government exists as an institution, even to check its own powers as it relates to the powers of the individual, the powers of the state. That is the difference between liberal democracy and authoritarianism. But in this instance, we see a government that is clearly repressive against the laws it made on its own, clearly protectionist to the extent that they don't even want somebody to say anything bad about them. Look at the issue of Petroleum. This young man has clearly not done anything that I personally consider against the law. Why? Because all the leakages...
He was accused of leaking sensitive government
leaking what? Sensitive what?
Sensitive government documents.
How sensitive can those documents be, apart from the fact that it spotlights and highlights the corruption tendencies of members of this government? How does that constitute a threat to national security? These are the issues, silent issues we should look at. It's like the elephant in the living room. People don't want to talk about it, you know. It's like the government has become a leviathan that, everything the government says.
Let's look at the fact that many of these journalists, investigative journalists tend to work undercover, and then they're able to get them even when they work anonymously. But we have bandits and kidnappers who are collecting ransom, who are going live on TikTok. And when someone goes live, you can get to know where they are at the moment. You can get to know what they're doing. These people show their faces brazenly. They receive ransom. They display the monies, and they even do giveaway. And people send them their account number and they transfer this money to them. And this same
government cannot track them.
I want you to recall Issa Pantami, the former Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, and who said he was the one that brought about the whole linking your NIN with your SIM. Right now, network providers can come up and block your NIN, and you will not be able to access your SIM card. You won't be able to make calls because they believe there's something wrong somewhere. With all of this being put in place, the data of so many Nigerians is out there flying in the cyberspace, and yet why can't we get these bandits and kidnappers, but journalists are within reach?
Yes, Chama, it speaks to the sincerity or otherwise of this government in fighting both insecurity and corruption. You just said something about bandits, terrorists who kidnap people, and ransom is exchanged, in the full glare of public. Some of them video them and send out, and they use phone numbers. You recall that when the medical students from Benue said that were moving down to Enugu were kidnapped, they were tweeting, they were sending chats, messages to their people, please rescue us. And our whole security intelligence couldn't put a finger on the people, the non-state actors that were behind all of these things. But it is always easy for the same government, for the same intelligence community to quickly, get at journalists who do what? Who don't even carry arms, who don't do anything, but just spotlighting or highlighting the ills in the government. And I ask, how does profiling the corruption tendencies of members of this government amount to a threat to our national security? These are the questions we should ask. But we don't see that. And this clampdown is, it's like one of my guests said this morning, and I agree with him, these things happen in piecemeal measures, and you don't check them. The moment you don't check them, the ones it is patterned, according to certain lines, it becomes difficult for you to change. So I would like civil society organizations to come out to become more assertive. Choma, we had a more vibrant civil society organization during the military era. And incidentally, the people that are running this government were part of those organizations, and nobody clamped down on them.
So you're wondering what changed?
What changed over time?
Then and now. All right, let's move on in the conversation so we don't dwell too much on this particular one. I want to talk about the fact that the resident doctors are going on a 7-day warning strike. They're saying for the next 1 week they will not work, they will not attend to any emergency care because certain number of their colleagues have been in kidnappers' den and they've not been rescued. We have Dr. Ganias Popola, who was kidnapped in Kaduna State about 8 months ago, and she's still in the kidnappers' den. And as at the time when she was kidnapped, like I said, it's been over 8 months. She was kidnapped with her husband and her nephew. The husband was released, but she's still there with the nephew. We have the 20 medical students. Someone raised an alarm on social media, I think it was also on X, formerly called Twitter, where they said that there is a reason for this trend where the kidnappers are targeting medical professionals in order to treat their members who have been injured, maybe during sting operations with the security agencies, and also to treat people who have been abducted, who may be falling sick in those places. What exactly? We've talked about the intelligence community, we've talked about the role of security agencies in making sure that it's not just people who come on the internet to speak, to lend, like we've called them, dissenting voices that they go after. How do we make sure that this trend does not continue? The federal government is trying to make sure that medical practitioners stay back in the country and practice after they are done with school. Will this encourage them?
So we're not just staying back. They are even making plans to bring down the ones that have left this country. You are aware of that?
Yes.
They are even making plans to bring down the ones that have left. And you see all these things happen within the medical circle. Well, it cannot be far-fetched if some people are of the opinion that, look, they keep these people to become their in-house medical personnel, when one of them is injured or when they are sick and all of that. Instead of going out in the public to seek medical attention, they use these medical doctors. Intelligence can also tell us a little bit more
if that
about
is true
that, if
or
that
not.
is true or not, but you can't go very
because
far
as it is right now, we don't even have so many medical practitioners to attend to the number of Nigerians we have right now. Let's talk of them being abducted.
What is the UN ratio? Is 1 to 600, and what do we have? We have like 1 to thousands in Nigeria. So let's not even go there, But beyond the issue of NARD, National Association of Resident Doctors, going on strike, insecurity, kidnapping has become our way of life in this country, and it is becoming a pattern. The moment it is patterned, Choma, if you look at countries that unraveled, if you look at Afghanistan, if you look at Iraq before American invasion and all of that, when they had sectarian clashes, this is how this thing started. Kidnapping for ransom, kidnapping and killing members of the opposition. Even in Somalia, that is how Al-Shabaab and all of that started, So if we look at these things take root in our country and we do nothing about it, but on the other hand, we are trying to clamp down on people who are even raising voices to say, look, this thing isn't right, then I'm afraid our democracy might be headed to a very bad end, if you ask me. So I have always said this government can unpack the whole issue of insecurity. They should be more sincere in fighting it. We have we have very intelligent officers. And sometimes you even wonder, when the Nigerian police work, they work very well. When Nigerian soldiers, when they are on foreign missions, they excel and come back with laurels, But back home here, you discover that when they start an investigation, the moment they are making headway, they get stuck somewhere. So is it that there are some factors that are inhibiting them? Is it that some people ensure that, look, the police doesn't perform, or the members of the security agencies don't perform their duties efficiently and effectively? Are there some vested interests? These are the issues that we should talk about. These are the things the intelligence community should tell us. Unfortunately, we are not hearing all of those. We are not.
All right. From the from the talk of doctors going on strike, we move on to ASUU. They were supposed to have a meeting with the federal government today to discuss so that they don't go on strike again, because they're asking for increased welfare, increased funding for universities. They're asking the stopping of the proliferation of universities across the country. But unfortunately, this meeting will no longer be held today, and it's been postponed to August 28th. All the while this administration has been in power, one thing that Professor Emmanuel Oshodeke, who is ASUU president, has said is that they've tried to give them time and not go on strike. Not just because they want the government to attend to their demands, but they don't want the students to be affected by the incident strike that ASUU keeps going on. With all of this right now, the NLC had just settled on a new minimum wage with the federal government. Do you think ASUU will also be able to get their own demands?
You see, one thing that I recall the president promised us, when he was campaigning, was that he was going to make sure that he puts an end to ASUU strike. The meeting has been moved from today to Wednesday. 2 days is just around the corner. It's not something to worry about. But I am bothered by the fact that, look, previous governments have not treated ASUU fairly. I mean, this negotiation has been ongoing, right from Obasanjo, Jonathan, Yar'Adua, and all of that, and they keep going back and forth. As at 2007, how much was ASUU asking for? ASUU was just asking for 200 billion naira. To do what? For their welfare, to deepen research, retrofit universities, research centers, lecture halls, libraries, and all of that. And Choma, these things are clearly lacking in universities. You need to go to a university and see how students are trained. The lecture rooms, the living halls. In fact, more than 60% of Nigerian students live off campus than in the university environment. And even the university environment is nothing to write home about. So this is what ASUU was asking for. 200 billion naira, like 2007. By 2009, they came and renegotiated it. And surprisingly, since 2009, they have been hammering on that 2009 renegotiated settlement. The federal government has not been able to fulfill its own part of the bargain. That is what is causing this whole problem. And what is it all about? About salaries too. And they came out the other time, IPPIS, integrated pay system and all of that. And lecturers say, no, we cannot do that. Lecturers are, you are trying to gag the education sector too, and it's an ivory tower. There are certain things you don't do in ivory tower. You have granted us university autonomy, or are you granting us university autonomy, and you turn around to say, oh, look, we should send all the money through TSA, and then you are asking every lecturer to come and enroll into the IPPIS,
saying that they actually want to fish out people who are ghost workers and people who are earning more than they should.
That is good, I understand. But what about university autonomy? I also know of the fact that the universities are not, the university lecturers, and especially the people who run them, are not saints. They are not saints. Most times, universities, federal government gives subventions to universities. And you go to universities, you don't see anything. You don't see anything. The halls are not maintained. The lecture rooms are not maintained. And there are other intakes, there are other funds that the university on their own take, from students that don't go to the TSA. And you ask the question, what do they do with those things? You see vice chancellors living very large at the expense of students and fellow lecturers. And federal government is very fast. What they do is they go to the university and pick one person, one lecturer, and make the person Minister of Education. The person that was kicking and say, oh, federal government must do this, federal government must do this. The moment he moves over to the other side, he starts reasoning with the federal government and say, oh, ASUU, can't we do this? Can't we do this? So the federal government is smart in doing that. So it's a two-way thing. If you ask me what the federal government should do is to ensure that, look, you don't toy with a nation's education. Our education is our future. A nation's education is its future. An uneducated mass, an uneducated population, Choma, is a time bomb. It's a time bomb. Sorry to say it, I'm on air, but look at what is happening in the north, certain parts of the north. Because they have what? the highest number of out-of-school children in sub-Saharan Africa. So when these people, it is easier to indoctrinate them, it is easier, to just deceive them and put them into insecurity and all of that. Why? Because they don't lack proper education. So our government should not toy with our education. And the United Nations also said that a certain percentage of our budget, I think like 14-17% of our budget, should be dedicated to the education sector. Have we seen that happen? It hasn't happened. Well, this particular budget, I think, is about 7% or thereabout, which is quite below the UN benchmark.
Which means we're dealing with the issues that are just so much from one sector of the economy to another, from
these things are
angle to another, from one industry to another.
These things are intertwined. And the moment they entangle like this, except you begin to detangle them one after the other, you'll always be in that mess.
All right, just before you go, I want to talk about this issue in a minute because of our time. The federal government has said the NNPCL does not have the funds required to rebuild old pipelines. Now, the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources Oil, that's Heineken Lokbobiri, actually stated this at a just concluded energy summit.
Next, because there's a mismatch between what the three persons are saying. Is either they are not talking to themselves or they clearly don't want to make the refineries work and they want to continue to import fear. That is what I pieced together from this. And the NNPC says, oh, we don't have money to fix the pipelines. And you said you made how much? 3.7 trillion naira as profit. And out of that, you use 2.7 trillion as salaries and overheads. And you keep telling Nigerians that, look, you are working on the refinery. You know that the pipeline that gets from the terminal to the refineries are not working. And you are promising us that you are going to fire the refineries in September. So you don't even know how to tell us lies. You understand? So there's a disconnect. Is that the three of them, the president, Heineken Lokbobiri, and NNPCL, should sit down, put their acts together, and tell us something that we can believe. Because clearly they are singing different tunes, and we don't even know what to take. And at the end of the day, we say, oh, these people are just telling us lies. Nigerians are very intelligent people. You can deceive some of the people some of the time. You cannot deceive all the people all the time. Clearly in this...
Mr. Chukwuma Okoremos, thank you for joining me. As much as I want to continue the conversation, our time is fast spent. Thank you so much and have an amazing day.
Thanks for sure. Thanks so much for having me.
You've been listening to News at 12 right here on Voice of the People 90.3 FM, and we've had Mr. Chukwuma Okoro for the news analysis segment. Outside Nigeria, at least 4 people have been killed after Russia launched a massive attack across Ukraine, seriously damaging some power and water supplies. Explosions rang out in several cities, including Kyiv, this morning, as more than half the country's regions came under attack. Authorities in Zaporizhia, Lusk, Ztomia, and Dnipropetrovsk regions each reported someone had died in the huge air raid, which featured missiles and drones. Russia's defense ministry has confirmed it targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which has been one of its long-term tactics, and it said all its targets were hit. Well, that is on the world news at 12. Just before we wrap up, let's take a look at the top stories again. You heard that resident doctors have begun a 7-day warning strike. Federal government postponed the planned meeting with ASUU. Minister declares NNPC has no funds to fix old pipelines, and President Tinubu vows to protect rule of law and to tolerate dissenting voices. On the foreign scene, 4 killed in huge Russian attack across Ukraine. And that is a wrap on the world news at 12. My name is Chioma Innocent. Please follow our social media handles at VOP903FM. For coverage of your live events and brand news mentioned on our news bulletins, do send a mail to news@voiceofthepeople.ng. Good afternoon and thank you for listening. Do stay tuned. Up next, Alaji Action is coming with Area Matter.